Hi, I'm Trisha Peach, host of the Peach Buzz, and I'm so happy you've come to join us again today. We have a great topic again this week. This has just been a summer of incredible, wonderful guests. Josh Denhart, Esther Moreno. We just had several in a row. Kelly Romero. That I have just, I've learned so much. I've learned so much. I didn't know how much I did not know. But today, I was prepared to blackmail, and I didn't even have to. Nick Blevins, who has his own podcast, he does so many amazing things with volunteers. I asked if he'd be willing to come on the show and talk about volunteers. This is something that he does, that he's passionate about, that God uses him in. And thank God he said yes. He is here today, and we had some questions. But first, I would just love for you to introduce yourself and your ministry to our audience at home.
Sure. Thanks, Trisha, for having me on. Of course, when you asked, I said yes. It was great having you on my podcast before. Now, if you told me you were having all those great other leaders on before me, I might have said no, or it would put me out first or something like that, because I don't have to follow that group, because there's some great people there. But yeah, I'm married. My wife and I have 3 kids. We live north of Baltimore, Maryland. I'm on staff at Community Christian Church, and I'm the next gen pastor. And we helped start that church 16 years ago. So I feel like I can remember the launch yesterday, but I also feel like it's been 40 years, and I feel like I've aged 40 years in 16 years. So, and then do a number of things on the side to help church leaders, primarily with Ministry Boost, something my friends and I started to have online courses and like resource bundles and coaching for church leaders, primarily in the kids ministry and the student ministry world. So that's certainly been a lot of fun. So when you talk about volunteer recruiting, I enjoy getting to be in the weeds of that at my church. I say enjoy. We all know it's a challenge. It's really hard.
Yeah.
But you learn some things, right? And then I enjoy helping other leaders do that, and then really learning from them too. Because that's the other thing. I mean, gosh, just in the last few months, having certain conversations, talking with Josh Denhart, just a few months ago, you just learn from so many other people what's working, what's not, what are some best practices. So hopefully maybe we can talk about some of those today.
Oh, I'm so excited. That is fantastic. Well, one of the, and I know I did not give you much of a heads up on this. This was not on our docket to talk about before, but yesterday I was talking to a group of children's pastors that are involved with CPC, INCM, and they were mentioning that they were really having some challenges with recruiting now after COVID-19, that several of them had lost a lot of volunteers, they had lost families, they had lost staff. And now that they've kind of gotten the green light to recruit again, they're saying, this is really hard and I feel like I'm failing, and everyone else is doing this great except for me. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. How do I recruit now? And they made the statement to get back to where we used to be. And my own opinion on that was probably the focus should shift to a relaunch to where we're going next, instead of constantly looking back at the team as it was. But I wondered your take on that, on volunteer recruitment. Is it tougher? I kind of doubt that it's just these couple of children's pastors that are having these issues. And what could we be doing? What would be some steps to take in volunteer recruitment in an age during and after COVID?
Yeah, I definitely think it's harder. And when they say they feel like they're the only one and other people, I think, who are the other people you know? Because I don't know a single person. I mean, I've probably had, I'm not exaggerating, I've probably had 100 to 200 conversations just since January with leaders about recruiting. And I've not had one person say that it's been easier. And I've been in churches. Now, I think the vast majority of churches are in a similar boat where, like, my church is 70% of what it was pre-COVID, and we have settled there. So, like, yes, is there still a few? I talked to a lady this week who runs our online service chat, and she's not come back in person. She's about to. So there's a few people like her, like 2%, right? Most of the people that were going to come back have come back, and the rest, they just stopped attending. It's no different, than if like our church in our history, one time we were moving buildings, we had about 4 months without a place to meet, and we lost about 25% of the people, and that was only 4 months, so imagine through COVID, and you could measure that, with kids. So I think part of it is we just got to understand, okay, where's our new base? Most churches are probably there. So now is like the new, whatever you're averaging now, just picture that as where you got to grow from. And I would not, man, you can't, on one hand, I do like to remember or like use the data about pre-COVID just because there's certain things you can compare to, but I never want to look at it like a burden that I need to get back there and it's nothing's working until we get there. Cause that's not true. We're 70% of where we were pre-COVID. A healthy church, I heard Tony Morgan say this once, like a healthy church might just grow 5% a year continually. Yeah. And if that's the case, how long does it take you to get from 700 to 1,000, let's say? Like if your church was 1,000, now you're 770%. I don't know the math on that, but it's a lot of years. You know what I mean? Like that's a long 35 and then 40. I mean, that's probably, I don't know, 10, 12 years. So I think we got to mourn the loss of that, you know, those numbers we had before, the volunteers we had before, the connections. I mean, it's real. I think about real people that I know that are not a part of our church anymore. Right now, as I'm saying, I picture faces and names. And so you kind of got to mourn that and then be willing to move forward, like you said, you know. And so I do think volunteer recruiting is harder. In my opinion, I've been having conversations about this and an experience in my own church. I think the main reason it's harder is people are more stingy with their time. And I think they're more stingy with their time for good reasons and bad reasons. So I think there are some people who COVID was a good chance to reset some rhythms and some boundaries. And I get that. I exercised for the first time in like 10 years during the summer of COVID. And, you know, I stopped by November when our church had been meeting for a few months and you know what I mean?
Go back to the grind.
Yeah. If I could have kept that would have been a great rhythm to keep, you know. And so some people are doing it for healthy reasons, like they're having better boundaries. And I don't mean saying no to church, but they're just more stingy with their time. They're saying no to all kinds of things. Then some of it's not great reasons. Quite frankly, I hate to use the word lazy, but it's a little bit of lazy. And then some of it is your people that were attending 3 times a month are now 2. The people that are attending 2 times a month are now 1. And so again, if you were 2 and now you're 1, what are the chances you're going to say yes to a volunteer role, you know, especially if that means you've got to be there every other week or you got to be there every week. So, I mean, it's not fun, but my answer, we can talk through recruiting in general, because I don't think that has actually changed. I think what has changed is you got to be a lot more bold now with the requests. You know, you got to be willing to challenge a little bit of their reasons, especially if they're not good reasons, if they're for bad reasons.
I love that. Okay. So all churches are kind of in this boat. The vast majority of them, we've got to mourn that loss of what was. Focus on where we are now. Doesn't mean you are a failure. It's you're in with a lot of other people. Recruiting has not really changed so much. It's still difficult. And now we have to be a bit more bold than we were before. I really like that for those of you taking notes at home. So he was talking about the principles of volunteering. This is exciting to me. So could you share any of those principles of volunteering for us, which would have they mattered before COVID and they're still in effect after?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of different ways to recruit volunteers.
Yes.
And there's a lot of different things that impact volunteer recruiting, both positively and negatively. I think of like, just as a practical example, if your church has one service, that's a great thing. And maybe that's all you can do, but just the numbers, maybe that's what you want to do. In fact, I know a pretty large church, over 1,000, that still right now out of COVID just has one service. And what I would say to them is you got to go to 2. You got enough people. Yes, the room won't be full because you got a huge auditorium, but you got to adapt the room and go to 2, if for no other reason than the fact that you can now have volunteers serve and attend a service.
Oh, that's excellent.
Now some churches can't do that. We have a lot of church plants that we've helped start, and they'll do a volunteer service that's not public, which is my favorite idea, by the way. If you have one service and you can't get 2, I preached at one time. It was 17 people, maybe, volunteers, which was interesting. We sang together some worship songs. Like, it wasn't a full service like the way the public service went, but it was great. So there's all these things that impact volunteer recruitment negatively. But if you just talk about like the in the weeds practical part, I don't think that's changed. And I'm not, we could talk about announcements from stage or a big initiative where those are okay. I think they work even less now, than they did before COVID. But to me, it comes down to a few things. We teach this in one of our Ministry Boost courses called Volunteer Boost. And we even have like a free version called the 5 Steps to Recruit Volunteers Now. It's kind of like
Excellent.
the scale down. I think of it like the Cliff's Notes, if anybody's old enough like me to remember what those were
The Cliff
back in the
Notes.
day. Yeah, nowadays it's like maybe Wikipedia or something like that. But and I'll walk through a few of those steps. And the thing is, it's not rocket science. Your mind won't be blown by it. It reminds me of like, I don't know, like of a sport. It's the work you got to do midweek that's not fun.
Yes.
You know, it's the reps in the weight room. It's doing 100 of those. Like my son's into lacrosse and soccer. And one of his weaknesses is he doesn't have a big leg. He really just needs to kick the ball like, 50 times a day all through summer to get ready for fall. If he wants to work on it, that's not exciting. He does not want to do that. Right. But it's going to produce the best results. And so, I mean, some of the things that are some of the steps that I think are key are you have to actually make the time for it, which that's one of the biggest barriers.
Yes.
When I ask leaders, hey, how many hours a week do you spend volunteer recruiting? So like, if you're listening to this right now, be honest with yourself. Most people say 0. 10% might say 1 hour, and then maybe 5-10% say 2 or more hours. And that's very few people. Yeah. And so that's the biggest problem. And what I suggest is you even get some accountability, like go to your boss and say, hey, I'm going to commit to 3 hours a week or whatever the number is. And I want you to hold me accountable to it. So ask me every week or every other week or whatever it is, how I've been doing with that. Because once you do that, then you can do the next part, which I think is really good. The biggest part is making a list of prospects. So, if you go back, I like round numbers because it's easier. But if we think of a church that has 500 people, maybe there's 200 volunteering already. Let's just say, maybe there's 100 kids, 500 total. If you need to recruit volunteers, if there's 500 attending on average at this point, after the pandemic, there's probably 1,000 people who call your church home, maybe 1,200. You know what I mean? Because again, they're not coming every week.
That's right.
So there's a lot more people than you think. That's even true in a small church. Yes. A lot of times in a small church, you think, everybody, not usually. It's sometimes, but not usually. So if you just got to build a prospect pool. And what I say is a prospect is anybody who's not serving. Yes. Like, because again, we're not qualifying them yet. There's no background checks yet. You haven't met them yet. We're just saying anybody's not serving. So your best friend, even though you may not think of it this way, is your church management system, which most people would not say that's their best friend. It's like their mortal enemy or whatever. And most churches don't manage them well. So that's hard. But what you want is to fit and talk to whoever you got to talk to on staff, even if it's the lead pastor, to get him or her to make some changes or whatever. You need to be able to search in there to figure out who isn't serving. Ooh. And you need to know that it's right, because you can't search and then pull together this list of, let's say you can get 300 names, in this church of 500, because, we said there's 1,000 or 1,200 attending. I would bet a church of 500 could find 300 or more easily, people who aren't serving. Mm-hmm. And you get this list of 300. Well, the next step is you email them, and I use a mass email system. In fact, I use our church management system, CCB is what we use, but you can do it in Planning Center or The Rock or, any of these
Fellowship
systems.
One.
MailChimp. You can put it in MailChimp and do it if you wanted to, or something like that. If you had a small enough list of prospects, you could literally just email them individually, right? Yes. But if it's north of 30, 40, 50, I would do some kind of a mass email thing, but you merge their first name in, and it's all you do is you invite them to a conversation. Yes. So it's, hey, Tricia, I'm Nick, one of the pastors on staff at CCC. And I'm telling you this because this is actually what I do and just did it, a few weeks ago. Right. And if you were new, because sometimes I'll search and just figure out who's like new in the last year. Yeah. And I might say, I'd love to hear about how you found your way to our church and what the experience has been like. And I'd love to be able to help you take a next step if that's a good fit for you. Let me know if you could talk this Sunday after service.
That's right? Perfect.
So 300 emails go out, right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
And they all say the same thing. So you got to be real careful about the list. And again, you don't send it to people who are serving, and don't send that to somebody really well. That would feel really weird. But then what happens is people reply, but not many. That's why we send it to so many,
Yes.
You get, 300 emails. I would bet maybe 15 people might reply. And great. You start setting up conversations. And this is where the time comes in. You got to spend the time. This doesn't happen quickly. And you start meet with those people. And then the next week you reply to all the people who didn't reply. Mm-hmm. And all I do is I have a little hack where I kind of make it look like it is literally a reply to that first email.
Yes.
And it's like, hey, Trisha, I wanted to know if you saw my email below. Would love to chat this Sunday if you're up for it. That's literally all I say.
That's
And
awesome.
it's a great follow-up because people are like, oh no, he noticed. Like I didn't reply. I get a whole lot of, oh, sorry for the delayed response. You know what I mean?
But see,
Like
the persistence,
yes,
I love it.
they knew it was a mass email, or at least they thought it was. So they didn't care to not reply
Right.
until I replied. And then they're like, oh no, he actually noticed. So, and again, you won't get, I mean, you're not going to get 100 of the 300 to reply.
Right.
But by the time you do all those things I just mentioned, you could get 30 to 40 maybe.
Absolutely. You know? And I remember our lead pastor telling us that he said, I know you want to do this recruitment push. And he said, I'll make you a deal. He said, I will not allow it unless you promise me you will contact every single person that signs up and at least be available to meet with them and do the work during the week. And I said, well, why do you say that? And he said, one year they had all these signups and a bunch of people were never contacted and they got their feelings hurt and then wouldn't serve, which I'm not saying they should hold a grudge, but I was understanding, okay, if you really want those volunteers, and you need them, then you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to work for it during the week. And I don't know of any other ministry in the church that's more volunteer intensive than kids ministry. Yep. So we had to break it up and say, okay, we're going to do this many. We'd email blasts as well. This many email blasts every single day until we can contact them all, because that was his deal. We couldn't do our push unless we would make that commitment to follow through. But then again, as you said, the accountability was good for us. Yeah, that's great. And gosh, that'd be terrible, right? To have all these people sign up and then not hear from you. It's usually the other way around. You know, I know of a lot of churches that we've done it where it's a big push from stage. The pastor does a great job casting vision. Yes. You know, 50 people sign up, and typically the follow through rate on that isn't very good. That's why I like those tactics once a year, but I'm a bigger fan of this kind of tactic where it's more personal from the beginning. It's harder work, but here's the other part is we haven't even got to the fact that some of the work you're going to do isn't going to help recruit volunteers to your ministry. Because if 30 people end up replying over a span of a couple of weeks or whatever, you start meeting with them. The goal, as I say it, is to help them take their best next step. Well, their best next step might not be serving in kids or in your ministry or whatever. And that's hard to, and gosh, God forbid, it might even be serving in students. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like serving in youth ministry. But for a lot of people, like again, we were just doing a round of this at my church. All of our staff that led volunteers were doing it together. So we had to be more coordinated about the lists and who's emailing who and blah, blah, blah. But man, a couple of conversations I had with one guy, it was like, he needs to go to our grief share group. Oh, and it's already halfway over. So he really needs to do that in the fall, which means now the best place for him is probably one of our starter groups, and then maybe serving next year. I mean, so like that's the way, if you're really thinking about them first and their journey and their faith, what's best for them. Or, you know, I had somebody that I talked to was interested in serving, but not in kids. And so it's like, okay, let's talk. Here are the other options. Like she didn't even know, you know, what the other options are. What she could do. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me go through some of the other options. And in a perfect world, a staff does this together, and that's where you end up helping each other. Right. Oh, you'd be a better fit here. In fact, our staff, because we were doing it together, the big joke was that our assimilation pastor, she kept sending people to our guest services team. And we're like, hey, hold up now. Not that many people have to go to guest services. What's going on here? Let's get some people over to kids and students and things like that. So it's pretty funny. So if you do that and you have those conversations, some of them serving is their best next step. Yes. And then you can go, okay, have an orientation. I love like tours where you tour the facility and make the orientation like a tour. So it's not a class. I love that for so many reasons. One, so because you walk around, it can be more engaging. Two, if you only have one person sign up, no big deal. Doesn't feel weird if you tour. It does feel weird if you sit in a class and it's you two. It's one person. Yeah. Like that doesn't feel as good. But that's pretty much, I mean, that's essentially what we teach there. We teach a whole lot more like other strategies and other ways to follow up and blah, blah, blah. But that's the core of it, is making that prospect list. And we say, this is where you got to do a little math. So if you don't like math, Just do this little part. Figure out how many volunteers you need. Let's say it's 27. Because you've gone through and thought, okay, to fill what I need now, I need 27. You need 10 times that many prospects. So
Oh,
if you
wow.
need 27 volunteers, you need 270 prospects.
Oh, wow.
And what I've learned coaching hundreds of leaders through this now in the last couple of years, well, more than a couple of years, to me, this is the easiest part. Again, they're prospects.
Yes.
So if you could literally just search your database and get 300 names, done. It's the easiest thing you'll do in this entire process. But I have learned
Yep.
a lot of leaders don't do it. They
No.
like, I talked to a leader who's like, hey, we tried this. She did the full volunteer boost course and it hasn't worked. And we talked and I said, okay, your sheet, we haven't filled out a form, and her sheet's like, you need 300 prospects. How many do you have? 35. It's like, oh, well, no wonder it's not working. You're
Right.
you're going to get a lot more prospects. And what I learned was, and that might've been a failure on our part as instructors, but they did do some kind of a push from stage and people did sign up, and she viewed them as prospects. So her list was just the people that filled out a card in service. It's like, oh yeah, okay. So that's not the same thing
No.
that we're talking. Like in our context, the prospects was everybody in the room who wasn't serving. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
But if you can get that many prospects and you actually reach out and you actually have conversations,
Yes.
you will work your butt off for 4 or 5 or 6 weeks.
Yes.
But you usually will get some results. I mean, I got stories after stories, of people doing this. Will it be enough? I don't know. And I think with COVID, I do think now the thing that is different is you have to be even more bold in asking them to serve
like
or
that.
getting them to follow up in the email. And for some personalities, you're like, no, but you got, don't be annoying. We're not talking annoying salesperson, but
more
man,
bold.
and we're talking about helping people grow in their faith. And what grows your faith
Yes.
as much as serving? Reading the Bible, prayer, like it's up there with all these other things.
Absolutely.
So we don't have to feel bad about being bold and helping people take steps in their faith. I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely. And again, the top down, our lead pastor is always saying, we want every single person in the church to find their place to serve. So if you don't know your place to serve, let's be finding your place to serve. Everybody needs to be serving somewhere, doing something, which that's a fantastic goal. And they used to say like 10% of the people in the church do all of the work. So usually there's a lot of people not doing anything that need to be contacted, that need to be followed up on. I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Now, I was looking at some of what you routinely teach on, and you talk about volunteer coaching. What is a volunteer coach?
So for us, a volunteer coach is a volunteer who leads other volunteers. And the best volunteer coach leads like they're a staff person. You know what I mean? Like, so, and the way I say it is, if it was working right, a family would come on Sunday morning and some volunteer, I'm thinking of Michelle on our team, who's been a volunteer coach in elementary forever. Michelle wears a shirt that's the same as the one the staff wears. And if you were checking in and Michelle was at the door, because she probably would be, you asked a question, she'd answer it. Next week, you'd see her again at the door. She's not leading your kid. That's a different volunteer, but you'll see her at the door and maybe ask her another question, or she asks you how you're doing, whatever. The best scenario would be like 6 months in, you're like, wait a minute, Michelle doesn't work here? No, she doesn't. She's a volunteer. That's not a great example because Michelle actually does work on our staff in admin, but she volunteers as a coach, and she volunteered as a coach for 8-9 years before she ever worked on staff. So now that sounds like a dream, right? Like, don't we all want those?
So awesome though.
But the reality is you can absolutely have that. It comes down to asking people, writing a job description. You're going to lead these volunteers. You got to be specific. Like, here's your team. Is it small group leaders at this service? Is it all of elementary? Is it all of preschool? Is it 3 rooms with preschool? Like, there's so many different ways a coach could lead. Like, we have coaches that lead our welcome and check in, like one coach leads the whole thing.
That's awesome.
And that, for us, that took a hit during COVID for sure. Absolutely. Just like volunteers, so we took a hit there. So it is not back to where it should be, but there's still a bunch of them. And it really comes down to writing a nice job description and don't be afraid to be honest about the expectation. We'll say this is 3 hours a week minimum, because an hour and a half on service, 30 minutes a week meeting with one of your team members, another hour communicating and things like that, doing schedules or whatever it might be. And of course the question is always, how do you get them? Or like, I always get the question, which one do you get first? Like, I need so many volunteers. How can I even think about a coach? I would always recommend get a coach first. Because because they can help you recruit, even if it's like, hey, can you do this coach role? Here it is. Let's take 2 months where you'll do both and you help me find your replacement.
Nice.
And then 2 months from now, you're only a coach. You're not in the role. And that's another level of leadership between you and them. So like if somebody calls out, they're in the room, not you. Right. And so there's just so many great things about it. It is, it's hard to do, but we have a course on that as well. But some of the tactics I use that I'll share real quick, definitely ask people one-on-one, like somebody that comes to your mind, have that conversation for sure. Another one is you could do like a 6-week group where you help people discover their spiritual gifts and personality.
I love that.
And if people email me, I can give them what I've done with that, just a simple plan we've done. And what's cool is you get a chance to like help them discover that. And then at the end of the group, you can invite them to be a coach.
Oh, I love it.
I've even done a training where I presented like the new org chart for where we needed to go. And I used like Moses and Jethro in Exodus 18, what it looked like before his father-in-law comes. And I used Acts chapter 6. And I just said, here are the holes, and my name was in all the boxes, like every coach, right? And, and I got a few coaches that way. The downside is you got to say no to some of those people though. Like somebody signs up that you hope didn't sign up. It's like, so you got to be careful which way you recruit, but man, coaches are absolute game changers in ministry.
I love that.
I don't know what we do without ours, because they lead so well. So you get recruiting every week, you get a couple coaches going, you'll be leading a healthy ministry. And then the best part is you can be freed up to lead. Like, most of the time you don't have that run around with our chicken with a head cut off kind of thing going on every Sunday. There'll be still some of that. There's always some of that.
Can relate.
But not as much,
Yes,
you can do
exactly.
these two things.
So you're saying do a personal ask, and then write that job description. Be upfront about exactly the high expectations. When you were talking about people being more stingy with their time after COVID, then I think it would be important to have high expectations so that they know this is really, really important. This is really important, and we do have large asks.
Yes. Well, actually, one of my favorite phrases that everybody should use, whether you're recruiting volunteers or recruiting a coach, this is not for everyone. Because it's not for everyone.
No,
if you think you're just checking a box, or you just feel bad, or you just want to help out or whatever, this isn't for you.
No.
If you want to be a coach but you don't want to put the time in, this isn't for you. There's the faith of kids at stake. Like, I don't want to like oversell it cheesy, but this matters. Like, what else could you give your life to that's more important than this?
Nothing.
Not many things. Nothing. And so this isn't for everyone. And the people that you want the most inside, they go, but maybe it is for me. And then the people who aren't a fit for it, they kind of rule themselves out. And that's okay for some people for a season. But man, I love that this isn't for everyone phrase, because the people that it is for, they get amped up. They're like, maybe it is for me.
Oh my goodness. I hope everybody there was taking notes on all of that. So do you have any final thoughts for us on recruiting, volunteer, like vision guests? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I just reiterate that it does take time. I've had people reach out actually about the Volunteer Boost course. They're like, because we say on there, like, you should give 8 hours a week. That's not exactly true, because it probably is 8 hours a week the first 2 or 3, because you're emailing so many people. By the 3rd, 4th, 5th week, it's getting down to 4 or 3 or 2. But we kind of aim high because we like almost want to roll it out a little bit, where it's like, don't think this isn't a magic button. So that'd be probably my final thought to it is, most of us neglect the time to recruit volunteers, and it's not because we're bad leaders. It's because we don't have time, and Sunday's coming, and all the other things feel more urgent because they're actually due. And then on Sunday or whenever your service is, that's when it's like recruiting feels urgent again, because you're shorthanded or whatever. But you get back into the week and it's like it doesn't feel urgent again. So making the time and then following some kind of plan, whether it was this one or some other plan, if you just did those 2 things, gosh, you're like light years ahead, and you should see fruit. There's always like the really hard scenarios where you do all this and there's still not the fruit from it. I've had people like get less than they wanted plenty of times. I don't know if I've ever had anybody not get anything. You know
Right.
what I mean? So like if you put, and that's surely a possibility for sure, but you put in the work there. And man, the other part too is, gosh, a lot of the conversations I had when we did this, the last round at my church, so many of them didn't end up in volunteering, but the relationships, the connections, the pastoral conversations,
Yes.
it's just awesome. You know, it's just great. So, and do it however you want. Like my preschool director, she feels like she's so in it on Sundays that she won't have these conversations on Sundays. So she schedules phone calls and Zoom calls. It's like,
Oh,
that's
that's
great.
awesome.
You found another way around it. That's
That's
awesome. So
fantastic.
I
Oh
would
my
just
goodness.
encourage people. Well, one, you're not alone. So going back to, am I the only? No, you're not the only one. Like, come on, this is everybody. It's harder at my church. We did not have as much success in this last round that we did as we would have had if it was 3 years ago,
Yes.
as we've had before. So you are, in a sense, doing kind of the same work or more work for less return, but that's okay. Be faithful with the input and let God handle the output.
Yes.
Take that burden off of like what attendance used to be. Take that burden off of like, I'm not doing well as a leader because we don't have these volunteers here. No, you're doing well. And if you can be more intentional with your time, follow this plan, maybe say no to a couple other things,
Yeah.
just to give you a good month to do this, you'll find some fruit. You'll be a different place a few months from now.
Well, and I love that, because this would be super important. This would be more important than, say, a new set renovation or whatever else you're working on. My thought is, all right, let's say you you needed 50 volunteers for kickoff. You say, oh, I got 33. That's 33 more than you would have had if you hadn't worked for it.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
That's 33 more than what you would have had.
Yeah.
And to me, that's worth it. If you're in a smaller church, even 2 or 3 new leaders that are on board 100%, that's going to change everything. So like you said, you'll be in a different place than you were.
Yeah. Well, I have one story too to help people realize how much we're all in the same boat in different ways. Most people have probably heard of Elevation Church, Pastor Stephen Furtick. They're probably polarizing in some ways, depending on what you think about their approach, their theology. They're a church like ours, like all of us. And yes, we do things differently. But if we just realize, and I know this more because I got to work with them about this right here. I came in and talked with their kids staff about volunteer recruiting. They got 21 campuses. They're probably somewhere around 15,000 in attendance now. They were probably up over 20, before COVID. Their online reach is just insane.
Yes.
It was fun to like tour the building and talk to the staff about that, but you know what, when we sat and we talked volunteer recruiting with this very large church with 21 locations, it was the same problems we all have.
Oh.
And that lady's at a campus of 300 total, in attendance. And that person's at one of the larger campuses. Maybe it's 3,000. Most of them were in the 300 to 1,000.
Yep.
And they had the same issues. They have volunteers primarily serve every week, and they're great, but they need to grow the team. And they're thinking about, how do we continue to grow from here to the future? So I love the vision of it. But it was a reminder of like, it's easy to look at other churches and think, oh, it's so much easier there. Oh, they got it all figured out.
No, they got it so much easier.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge everywhere. I'm working with a couple of churches in Florida. They're growing because everybody in the East Coast is moving there. Yes. Not really, but you know what I mean? and I'm sure there's other growth reasons too, but a lot of it is Christians moving into town and coming to the church.
Absolutely.
And they need volunteers too. And maybe it's not to keep up with lower numbers, but maybe it's to keep up with
growing numbers.
Yeah. So like and unfortunately, you don't ever really arrive. I mean, you can definitely get to a healthy place where like, oh, you're, I don't know, 90% staffed and you've got some coaches, and that is a reality. And our ministry has lived there for probably most of our years because of doing this right here. But we got hammered with COVID. Yep. I just noticed the other day, our volunteer percentage is still, and I'm saying percentage, so not raw numbers. Right. The percent of people that volunteer is lower, about 10% lower than it was before COVID. And so for me, that was a big red flag, because it's like, not only are the numbers lower, but the percent of people serving is lower. Yeah. And so we're all in that boat too. So give yourself a lot of grace,
I agree. We're all in that boat. And I think you're never, like you said, you never arrive, because you're going to have people that move out of that ministry for whatever reason, that it's the end of their season, or they're moving, maybe they're moving down to Florida and Texas, or whatever's happening, they're going on to a different ministry. You're going to have to constantly have an influx of new volunteers coming in. And hopefully then when your church is growing again, you've got to have more volunteers coming in. I used to joke with the youth pastor. He's like, you just did a recruitment campaign. I was like, every day it's a recruitment campaign.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's the way to think about it. Yeah, because now the thing I would say though is, if you wrote down how many volunteers you have, how many do you need? Again, let's come back and let's say you need 50, you have 30, so you're 20 short.
Yeah.
You're with that math, you're running at 60% of what you need. Well, yeah, you shouldn't live there. And a lot of churches do. Yeah. Now, are you going to live at 98 or 105%? No, but you could live at 85 to 90, believe it or not. That is a realistic thing. And then what you're talking about, people leaving, growth, that all happens, but you're at a much better water line, if that makes sense. Like, we went from 90 down to 83, not 60 down to 53. And those are very different. Those are very different things, Yeah. So doing this work can kind of raise the water line. And then from there, you're always recruiting, but it's not like, desperation every week. It's just certain seasons, certain seasons.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. Oh my goodness. I hope you all took a bunch of notes, or that you will replay this and maybe share this with other people that need to hear this. We all need to hear this, because this is where churches are at right now. This is reality. But if you're sitting there thinking, I want to know what this volunteer boost program is, I want to know how can I get in contact with Nick Blevins? How can I hear his podcast, which you should be asking? How can they get hold of you? And what is this volunteer boost program?
Yeah, so my site's nickblevins.com. If you just search that in podcast, you'll find, I call it the Family Ministry Podcast, but it's got my name on it. And then ministryboost.org is where we have all that stuff. Volunteer Boost is just one of the courses. We probably have about 30. We have a membership where you get access to everything. But for a lot of churches, you might just want to start with Volunteer Boost and give it a shot. It's designed like a 28-day challenge.
Okay.
Think like we kind of stole the idea from, like, I don't know, the 7-day green smoothie challenge, or you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
And the reason we did it though is we were trying to help with two things. We were trying to help with the fact that you don't give enough time. So let's make it a challenge where there's at least some form of accountability. You get an email every day. There's videos 4 days a week, and it's all it's all, smaller, chunks. Nice. And then it's also a plan to recruit from. So it's been, because we've taught volunteer recruiting through other courses, but I think this format has been really helpful to people. And we also we even do volunteer, like we'll do a workshop like I did with Elevation with a staff. Nice. Now, generally your church, you'd want to be larger to, make that worth it in terms of bringing us in to do that on site with you. But man, the Volunteer Boost course, or just becoming a member, and of course you cancel down the road if you wanted. But if you just did that, or even just do the free thing, find the 5 steps to recruit volunteers now. Maybe we can put that in the link.
Absolutely.
That's free. Go do that, put it into practice, see what kind of results you get.
Absolutely. We'll put that down in the link for you guys to check out. Some of you, I think, would really benefit from that course, 28-day challenge. What could that look like to really intentionally have a plan for recruiting, building that volunteer team? I think if we wait for it to happen by osmosis, it just doesn't work that way. I did a Facebook appeal and nobody signed up. You got to have a plan, a strategy. I think that'd be fantastic. So I would like you guys to check it out, nickblevins.com. Look at his podcast, and he's got this course, which I think would be a great idea to check out. He said you can become a member there and, drop it later if you want to, or just see if that works for you, which I think would be great. And there's also the free link. No excuses. So we all need volunteers. What are you going to do this week to recruit and empower your volunteers? Our pastor has said he will not apologize for inviting people to do ministry, because when they get to heaven someday, only what was done for Christ will last. So you are asking them to do the most rewarding thing that they can ever do. So this week, there's your challenge. Get in there. What are you going to do? Get a strategy, get a plan for recruiting the volunteer team that will change things. You'll be in a different place down the road. I'm so thankful. I know you guys, there's so much good material in here. Thank you so much to Nick for being with us today. Oh my goodness, that was fantastic. I'm hoping a lot of them watching will take advantage of this and see what they can do. Maybe even they'll have some questions down below. I always check it out if they've got comments and try to answer those comments. Thank you, all of you watching, for what you do for Jesus and his kids. We hope you come see us again next week. What a wonderful, wonderful discussion. All right, leave your questions down below. Have a great week. See you soon.